Okay. No, I'm good. Thank you very much. Just thank you very much for inviting me here today. I really appreciate it, and I'm very honored to be here, particularly with students. My love has been students for a large part of my career, and it's just invigorating to be around you guys. So let me just give you a little disclaimer about my talk. So I am a very honest person, brutally honest, and so hopefully I won't say anything to offend anybody. These are my opinions and sort of my views from 34 years in a wheelchair. Yeah, it's been a long road, but hopefully this will also encourage some of you to keep on keeping on and get your education. Like Dr. Robertson said, actually, I really liked his STEM acronym because I think perseverance is the biggest key to success, particularly when you have a disability. So, my talk is called Navigating a Career in STEM from a Wheelchair. It's experiences from the field. And these pictures here are just some of the things that I've been working on at Sandia for the 4 years that I've been there. I work on some advanced processing and memory architectures, and I also, in the middle there is a picture of some dashboards of workload characterization stuff. I work on a monitoring system called Lightweight Distributed Monitoring System up at Sandia. And then on the far right there is, I work on exascale systems a lot, and so that's a kind of vendor agnostic, non-proprietary agnostic image of what exascale systems are starting to look like and what we think they're going to look like in the 2020 time frame. Okay? How do I forward my slide? Okay, great. Oh, there you are. Okay, awesome. So I'm going to share a little bit about myself. I want you guys to understand me personally. So this is my story. Once upon a time, there was a girl named Janine. My parents are both first-generation U.S.-born citizens, so their parents came from Spain, Italy, and Mexico. Something that's extraordinarily humbling to me is that on both of my grandfather's birth certificates, they died with the occupation of a janitor, and my dad really broke that mold, and he went to school and got his PhD in physics, which is a big reason why I was interested in STEM. So this is my husband here on your left, my father standing up. I've been married for 22 years. It's been an awesome 22 years. On the right is my whole family, so that's my mom and my dad and my two sisters. And oddly enough, both of my sisters have degrees in electrical engineering. Yeah, very strange. So I was in a car accident in 1983. I fell asleep while I was driving at the age of 19. You can do the math. I'm not a spring chicken. I fell asleep while I was driving. I didn't involve anybody else. So that was a real blessing. And I have to say my accident has been nothing but a blessing and a big learning experience. Next slide. So I always have to share the second love of my life, which is my horse. I don't let disability keep me from the things that I love to do. I think when you have a disability, you need to focus on the things that you can do, not the things that you can't do. Because if you focus on the things that you can't do, you're probably going to be a sad, miserable person. Okay, it's a choice to do that. It's a choice to be happy and positive. But, I think making that choice is it's really a great decision because it can lead to a really fulfilling, very full, normal life. I live a pretty normal life for somebody who's obviously not quite normal in a lot of ways. But this is my horse, Ringo Starr. Me and my husband enjoy riding together. Yes, he's a beetle. Yeah, he's awesome. He's a Tennessee Walker. I ordered him online. Yeah, you can acquire a horse and not see him until he jumps off a trailer in your driveway. I've seen more of New Mexico on the back of a horse, I think, than I have in a car. Next slide. So, education-wise, just to let you guys know sort of where I've been and kind of the experiences that I've had. I'm a home girl. I like to stay close to my family. So I didn't want to leave for school. I stayed at home. I grew up in Colorado Springs. I got my BS in electrical engineering at the University of Colorado in Colorado Springs. I really left home and went up the road maybe 100 miles to Boulder and struck out on my own and got my MS in computer science at Boulder. I actually intended to stay for a PhD, but the campus was extraordinarily inaccessible, and I just couldn't stay there because it was really prohibitive. I got my PhD, so that's when I decided I had to leave, and I did look around to many, many institutions, and the sad truth is even today I don't think somebody like me can pick where they go to school, because a lot of institutions are not accessible. And the sad thing about the ADA is there's no real enforcement. The enforcement is through civil suit, and so if you like to go around suing people, that's great, but I just wanted to get a PhD. And so I left Colorado. They basically said, sue us. I said, I don't want to sue you, I just want to get a PhD. And I looked around at the East Coast, and the East Coast is really inaccessible. The infrastructure is old, and it's downtown, and it's not good for somebody with a mobility disability like mine. So to be honest, the Southwest is the absolute best place for people in wheelchairs. So anybody with a mobility disability, similar to mine, spinal cord injury isn't the only thing, but it's pretty prevalent. But this is the best place to be because things are flat and there's a lot of room to build, and they're newer. And so I actually wound up at New Mexico State because I was in natural language processing, and they had a really awesome center at NMSU. And then when I visited, the campus was accessible, so my decision was made. Okay, next slide. So my career. So I graduated with my undergrad and went to work for several years as an electrical engineer, and I went into the mechanical engineering department after a while because I got really bored with the electrical engineering widgets that I was making. I worked for McDonnell Douglas Aerospace, which no longer exists. It was bought by Boeing many, many years ago. Then I went to school and was in school for quite some time. I actually quit school for a while. I actually was a student here for a while. I don't know if you guys knew that, but I was a student down here for a couple of years, and to be honest, I was living in Las Cruces, and I'm not much of a commuter. So I got tired of that and sat out for a little while, but wound up going back to NMSU and finishing my degree. 2002, they hired me. I was not their first choice, but luckily the first choice person already took another offer, so I got a job. And I was in the Clip School of Electrical and Computer Engineering for many years. I was an associate professor, and it was really the point I needed to either go to full or do something else, and I kind of was feeling the rumblings of doing something else, so I decided to leave, and I landed at Sandia National Laboratories and in the Scalable Architectures group. I'm in the group that really aims to specify and sort of drive the computing industry toward systems that help our applications, the kinds of applications that Sandia looks at. And a lot of people don't really understand what Sandia does, and I'm pretty blunt about it. I think some people aren't as blunt, maybe on purpose, but this is not classified information by any means. But we steward the nuclear stockpile. Okay, so what does that really mean? We don't sit around and watch the nukes all the time and make sure they're all okay. We used to be able to test them underground. Many, many years ago in a land far, far away in Nevada, we had an underground test facility. And that's where all of the nuclear weapons were tested for degradation and for quality and to see if they were still working. We can't do that anymore. So they started simulating, function and degradation and a lot of other things many years ago, simulating those on computers. And so that has continued throughout these last 25 years or so, and that's why we need really big systems, because these simulations are really complicated and run for a long time. So the national labs are one of the big acquirers of high-performance computing systems. Okay. so the highlight of my career was the 2008 PCASE Award. So the PCASE is Presidential Early Career Award for Scientists and Engineers. It's awarded by the President of the United States, and I got it under President George Bush. And the only reason why I really, I'm not one of those people who toots my own horn, but this was an awesome thing to receive. Not very many people get it. I was really shocked when I got it. But notice how I stick out a little bit like a sore thumb. I really bet I'm the only person in a wheelchair who's ever received that award, but I never really went and looked. The White House is not accessible. What a surprise. And so I did something sort of brave. I decided not to tell them I was in a wheelchair because I figured, shame on you. You passed the law. It's 2008. You should, it's high time you need to be accessible. Well, they weren't. They scrambled. They didn't know what to do. They had no way to transport me. I couldn't get in the front door. So it was, but it just shows you sort of, really what the laws have done. And, they've done some, but from my perspective, not a whole lot. So eventually I did make it into the White House, and the awesome thing is I had to go the back way. So I got to go through the West Wing, and I got to go through right by the Oval Office, and I got to see lots of artwork, which was really awesome because George Bush is a Western fan. So I saw all kinds of some of my favorite Western artists on the wall. Yeah, they have really nice artwork in the White House, so it was kind of a treat. All right, next slide. Okay, so let's get to sort of the beef of what I want to tell you. I'm not here to give a boring technical talk. I'm here to sort of tell you about, what to expect or what you do when you have a disability, and, you're in STEM or in any other field, really. So the good news is you can get an education and have a successful career with a disability, okay? You can. Education, it was tough because I have physical accessibility issues that just are hard to meet and they're costly to meet, and I think that's why they aren't met. But, every place I've ever worked was really very accommodating. So, that is the very good news. So I say, yay, good news, right? Okay, so next slide. So the bad news is there are a lot of obstacles. No matter what disability you have, I think there are obstacles, both physical and social. So, I always say you got to grow your shell now because it's tough, okay? There's days when you think you should just sit home on the couch and eat bonbons. And there's days when you just feel like you're treated like a third-class citizen, and there's days when you just feel like society wants you to stay home, okay? And, you just got to decide what you want to do, and I think that perseverance and internal drive is really, really, really important. And you've got to learn where that's at, and you've got to learn to tap into that. Slide. So physical obstacles, there's a lot. The Americans with Disability Act hasn't fixed everything, and I know a lot of people think it has, but it really hasn't. Universities are still in general pretty inaccessible. Now I know the universities in the Southwest, and I found UTEP particularly accessible, as well as NMSU, but go in the Midwest or on either coast and anywhere in between, and it's old infrastructure, and it's just not really built for people with disabilities. There's no bathrooms. There's, I hate when I'm in a classroom and I have to sit in the back. I have one choice. I can either sit in the back or sit in the front. I don't really get the same kind of desk that a regular student does. It makes you feel even more of an oddball than you already are. And so, there just aren't universities who really do this well. Curb cuts, bathrooms, parking, I can't get a handicap parking space to save my life typically, but housing, on-campus housing, disabled housing is almost non-existent. And it still is today. I hate to say this, but I would contend that this situation still exists today in most universities. So, that just means that if you're choosing a university to go to, you have to be really careful, and you have to visit and learn how to ask the right questions, because that's going to be really important. You sort of have to advocate for yourself even when you're tired of advocating for yourself. You really need to learn how to ask the right questions so that you can get what you need where you go. So traveling with a disability is a complete nightmare. So this is another physical obstacle that I face in my job quite a bit. So we travel a lot. San Diego's, I don't know, they love it, I think, but I'm on a plane a lot, enough that my wheelchair is practically rattled apart. I'm constantly losing bolts and picking them up and going, where is this from? My husband just grabs them and says, I don't know, but I don't think you're going to fall apart. I'll put it back in later. Okay, great. Some of you guys probably wonder how I even travel. I do travel by myself. I don't travel with a companion. I have to be able to lug my suitcase around. I have an S-hook that I connect to the luggage thing that comes out of my suitcase, and I connect the hook right here and connect it to my suitcase in like a giant train, and I roll through the airport and get a lot of stairs. The way I get on an airplane is on a little thing called an aisle chair. They board me first and they take me off last. It's a really skinny chair that goes through the aisle. I have to prearrange that, and that's, even if I call 10,000 times, it still can turn into a fiasco at either side, because I think they don't communicate. And even though you put it in your profile and you mark it on your ticket, you get there and they act surprised, which never ceases to amaze me. I've given up being upset about it because it's not worth it anymore. Choose joy, that's one of my mottos. So there's very few wheelchair accessible rooms in hotels, very, very few, and they don't save those or set those aside for people who need them in any way whatsoever. Actually, they assign those rooms just like any other room. So I can call up, I can call 10 places and not find a single accessible room, but I know darn well they're not filled by people who really need them. In my years of travel, I never see anybody like me. I think one time I have. It's really kind of sad. You're really not seeing people with physical disabilities like you did 15 years ago. They're really starting to disappear, I think, and the statistics show that they are really disappearing. Hand control rental cars. So I drive with a hand control. I can rent a car with a hand control. This also turns into a fiasco, though, because I can't force them to make sure that it's there for me. All I can do is call as many times as I can and emphasize as many times as I can that's how I'm going to get around. I can't drive a regular car. I was just in Oakland, and of course I arrived, and I was all happy because I got off the plane early. It was 5 o'clock. I got to the rental car. Thought, great, I'm going to be in Livermore pretty early. I can get dinner, get settled, and get a good night's sleep. Lo and behold, no hand control car. Okay, the dance begins. I always say the dance begins. And so, I had to wait for an hour while they installed a hand control. Thank goodness it was 5 o'clock. If it was any later, I would have just been out of luck. And it's amazing that, they don't really try to help me. They just say, I'm sorry, Mrs. Cook, and leave me. Yeah. And so, it's pretty amazing, even on hotel rooms, if I have a reservation, that doesn't mean I'm really going to get that room. And I can't tell you how many times I've arrived really late, and all I get is, I'm sorry, Mrs. Cook. It's like, okay, what am I supposed to do now? Yeah, so I call my husband crying, and he tries to help me find another hotel room, and I usually have to stay way far away from wherever it is that I'm going, which complicates things even further. But it's a complicated life. I'm not trying to just say, woe is me. This is reality. And so, if you have a physical disability, prepare yourself. Prepare yourself for the worst, because when it's not so bad, you'll be happy. Public transportation, really accessible transportation doesn't exist in most cities. It's just not there. They have 2 buses in the entire, city of 1 million people that are accessible, and they're never at the place that you need them to be when you need them to be. And there's no such thing as a wheelchair accessible hotel shuttle. You know, most people just say, well, take the hotel shuttle. I'm like, okay, yeah, that's a great suggestion because I can't get on a hotel shuttle. None of them are accessible. And you know, cabs aren't accessible, and cab drivers get really cranky over my wheelchair. So honestly, the easiest thing for me to do is rent a car. Now you can see how this could degrade your mental state, right, from facing all these obstacles. But again, perseverance, motivation, drive, keep your eye on where you're going and what it is that you want to do in your life, and just try not to let these other things bother you. I always say when I have a bad mental day, I just do something that makes me happy and forget about it. Ride my horse, eat chocolate, drink a fine wine, you know, whatever it is. Learn these strategies for coping because, you know, it's hard. Next slide. So I just had to show this picture because I just took this a month or two ago, and you probably can't see it all that well, but this is a radio tent set up in handicap parking. I was at a grocery store, so you know I can't park at a grocery store to save my life. So this is the last grocery store that I've tried in Las Cruces that I can actually still get a parking space at. But in the background here, this trailer is the Las Cruces police. They were hosting an event and had the radio people set their tent up in handicap parking. So yeah, this is what we're up against here. And you know, my husband, who gets really angry about these things, came down, so I texted the picture to him. He's like, what is this? And I said, well, it's par for the course. And he came down and he talked to them, and the police claimed that they can't ticket in a private lot, which is just not the truth. You can look up the statute. It's usually on the placards, so I don't know the law. And, you know, I mean, this isn't anybody with a handicap placard. I don't know. They just don't care about the law. And so, you know, if the police don't even care, I don't know. Handicap parking is the end of my independent life because I can't park anywhere. I can't park at the airport anymore. I have to be driven. So yeah, just if you know somebody who's abusing this, please tell them that they really shouldn't do it. And if you have a space and can walk, just take the closest space and leave these for people that really need them. Okay, social obstacles. These are probably the hardest things. So the perception with people with disabilities, I can't hide mine. I can't hide my disability. I'm truly physically disabled. I'm on the sign, for Pete's sake, right? You know, the perception is really, really negative. People always think I'm lost, no matter where I'm at, whether I'm at a conference, or they always think I'm lost. Always, okay? They think I'm confused. They think I need help. You know, and sometimes I do need help, but I'm very blatant about asking for it, and it's pretty clear when I do need help. People treat me very differently than an able-bodied person would be treated, particularly when I'm traveling. They never could dream that I'd be traveling for business, so I always get, so where are you going to visit? Well, I'm visiting Livermore National Lab for a meeting for a week. You know, and I just don't get treated the same. I get treated very differently. They often leave me on the plane. I'm the last one off the plane, but it's not uncommon for the lights to be shut down, and they're not supposed to, but everybody's has deplaned except for me while they're waiting for the person who operates the little chair to come and get me. I think they just don't think I have anything better to do than to wait. And you know, that's not the case. I have much fewer hours in my day than most people have just because of the difficulty of being in a wheelchair, and especially in the morning, it's really hard. I mean, just think about how I get dressed without being able to stand. Just let your mind grind on that for a couple minutes. It's not easy. So they don't ever think I'm like traveling for business, and God forbid that a person with a disability would have a job, right? Let alone a PhD in electrical engineering. So it gets pretty hard sometimes to take this, but you know, I just try to focus on the goal. If I do be brave enough to take public transportation, I wait for hours while my colleagues are at dinner or getting to bed, I'm there waiting for the one accessible bus in the city to come back and get me. So it's tough. The public generally believes ADA fixed everything, but the ADA, the problem is it's just not enforced, and so it's a big problem. The other problem is the definition of disability has changed, and this is really why I don't think you're seeing physically disabled people out in the workforce anymore, or out in public, because you know, the other disabilities that aren't as severe maybe have really become the mainstream. So they're not expecting somebody like me at a hotel. They're not expecting somebody like me at an airport. 15 years ago it was different. You know, just watch who parks in handicap parking. That's the face of disability. People who have injuries, or you know, who suffer from some disease, or they're not people who are really what I call disabled. And you know, I hate to get into the invisible disability thing, but I really do think if you don't need accommodation, I just don't know how you have a disability. You know, because a disability really is that, you know, some major life activities you can't do, such as walking or dressing yourself, or, you know, these things. And so I think the definition of disability has become just way too broad. And so I think it's pushed the people who are really disabled out of the picture. And, you know, to be honest, hotels are starting to remodel, and they're remodeling to be less accessible than they were before. So it's more broadly accessible to people who are less disabled than me. I hate to say that, but and to sort of serve a different population. So you know, unless things change, I think, you know, people like me are really going to disappear in the population. They're going to stay at home. Okay, next slide. So advice. This is my takeaway in my last slide. Know your self-worth. If you don't have a positive perception of yourself and what you can contribute, you know, it's going to be a tough go. So really know your self-worth, because you do have a lot to contribute. As other people said before me this morning, you know, we really need persons with disabilities in educational, higher education institutions, and we need them in the workforce. You have a unique perspective, and you can contribute to making this place a bigger world, a better world, okay? So just know that. Find advocates. You have to self-advocate, but you get tired of self-advocating, so find people who can advocate for you. Okay, register with your Students with Disabilities office, because they can advocate for you. Okay, be honest with yourself and with your employer and the Office of Students with Disabilities about your needs and your limitations. Sometimes it's hard, right? It's hard to really spill your guts and tell them really what you need, but if you don't tell them, they don't know, okay? So just make sure that you know what you need and you voice that. Find support. There are support groups, and you know, I was one who thought these support groups were just full of a bunch of whiny people who wanted to whine, right? I just want to know how to cope and get the job done and keep going so that I can have a good life and reach my goal. But seek out those groups, because you have camaraderie and you have support, and you can get advice from people who have gone through the same or similar thing. Or, you know, it's amazing what some people know and just what different perspective they can give to you to help solve a problem that you're facing. And educate people, okay? So I really don't think that, you know, these perceptions and these physical obstacles, I don't think they're malicious for the most part. Okay, I just think people are naive. They just don't know. And so if we're not out there, we're not going to be seen, and people aren't going to know. Okay, so really, you know, try to educate the people you're around on who you are and you know, what your needs are and how you contribute to society. Don't be shy to say, look, I got my PhD in astrophysics, and I work for Los Alamos. Don't be shy in saying that, because I think the more that people know how able people with disabilities are, the more the perceptions are going to change. Okay, so please be out there. It'll help me a lot too, because it's pretty lonely out there right now. Okay, next slide. I think that's all I have to say. So if you guys have questions, you're more than welcome to ask if that's fine.
Any questions from the audience? Thank you, Dr. Cook.
Sure.
Any questions? Comments?
Yeah.
No.
You don't need it?
No.
Okay.
Feel free to ask me at a break if you have some questions.
No?
They're very quiet. We're early then. I left 10 minutes for questions.
Thank you, Dr. Cook,
Sure.
for your wonderful and inspiring presentation. As you mentioned, we are very fortunate that UTEP is wheelchair accessible. And I am pretty aware that the CAS office works pretty hard to ensure that students with disabilities are offered the same opportunities that any other students get. And we as a UTEP community, we also work pretty hard to ensure that the success of all of the students is obtained. Not only students, staff and faculty as well. But obviously there is always much more to do and improve. We really appreciate the time you have taken to be here with us today, share your experiences, a little bit of your personal life, the research you do, and the hobbies you enjoy. Please accept this small present as a token of our appreciation. Thank you for being at UTEP and being a good UTEP friend.
Well, thank you for doing it.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
I just wanted to ask a question and having this opportunity. So you mentioned one of the things that really caught me personally was you talked about choosing the joy of the day, which I think is, and that's something I say to myself, because we all feel pressure. But I think the other thing I was really interested in was your motivation in your field. So how did you come, with a dad who was a physicist and two sisters who are electrical engineers, it's obviously in the genes, I would think. But you mentioned your grandparents both died with the occupation of janitor. So I just wanted to, if you could share a little bit about your own personal motivation that led you in your field, because I think that would be very important for the aspirations of the students here today.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So the question was, what sort of led me to the aspiration in my field. So I did have some really good home influence from my dad. So my dad always pushed us towards math and science. Because, even if you go into math and science and don't wind up going into a physical science area, it never does you any harm. So I think what really motivated me was I was always interested in planes. Okay, I know it's a really strange thing, but when I was 10 years old, I wanted to have my birthday party at the airport, and my mom wouldn't let me. Because I was always so fascinated that these big things could actually get off the ground. I'd just sit there and watch them take off and watch them land, and I just was always sort of interested in aerospace, which is why I sort of went to McDonnell Douglas when I graduated, because I got to work on rockets, right? Really big planes going one direction, one time. But that's really what sort of brought me into it, is because I was interested in aerospace, And my dad was really good about sharing what he did with us. So he wasn't just a nuclear physicist, and he didn't just come home and not talk to us about what he did at work. And so we'd ask him, well, what did you do at work? And he'd tell us, well, today we tested a tank. Actually this was back in the days when they tested tanks in the field, right? We tested a tank to see if it maneuvered the way we thought it would and had the weapons on it. And, he'd show us pictures, and it wasn't classified, obviously it was out in the field, but, sharing that with all of us girls, I think was really important. So, and a long time ago, a funny story is he'd take us to work with us on Saturdays sometimes, I think, because my mom needed us to leave. And so it was really fun because my dad worked at Community Sciences, and the thing that I remember is you could write on the walls, right? They had like those overlays where you took the black pen and you could write on the walls. And the other thing is my dad would let us call up his friend somewhere. I don't know, we dialed up over the computer on a modem, on one of those old modems that you young people probably don't even know existed, but those big clunker things that you actually dialed and then plugged into the receptacle and it made all the noise. And then miraculously, some poor sap at the other end would talk to us girls, you know, while my dad was getting work done. We'd talk back and forth to one of his friends over the computer. So I always, you know, my dad did a really good job of sharing that with us. So if there's any parents out there, you know, I know you come home tired and you know, your kids are kind of annoying sometimes, but, you know, share that with your kids because I think it does really make a difference. And so I'm forever grateful that my dad shared that with us and my mom allowed him time to share that with us because I think that's where all three of our loves for science and engineering came from.
Yeah. I think just maybe you can comment something. So there is your disability is visible, we can notice it. But there are so many hidden disabilities and the traumatic kind of experience sometimes. Veteran, for example, they were out. They had to go through the experience and they can't pick up their classes. Any comments, anything you'd like to share on that?
Yeah, so the question is about people with hidden disabilities. And so, and you know, the people, so I stick out like a sore thumb, and the people with hidden disabilities aren't really identified, right? And so I think, you know, I think in those cases, sometimes it's harder to advocate for yourself. Because, you know, they see me coming and they know me. So to be honest, at my undergrad institution, there was really not much accessibility, but they knew I had an accident. It was a small school, and when I came back, they had modified bathrooms, they had put door openers on that weren't there before. Okay, so I didn't even have to advocate for myself. But if you're a person who has a traumatic brain injury, something that's not necessarily seen, you know, my advice to you would be to share that with people. Okay, as hard as it is, you need to share that with people. You need to share that with your colleagues, and you need to share that with your professors in the classroom. You know, because you might have a really bad day where you have an excruciating headache. People don't understand headaches, okay, but they can be excruciating and debilitating, and if you have a head injury, sometimes that comes with the territory. Sometimes other things come with the territory, but they don't see those. And you need to make your professors or your employers aware of those. And so I would just suggest practicing, telling them, I know it's hard, it's not easy, you know, sort of putting your weaknesses out there. But, you know, your weaknesses can be your strength, too. And so, you know, practice on your colleagues what you're going to say to people and educate people. We all need to know. Okay, we all need to know what you're going through so that we can have empathy and we can help and support you. I don't think anybody's malicious. I just think people don't know. Did that answer your question?
Hi, Dr. Cook. I was wondering if you could share your recollections of being a UTEP student.
Yeah. Okay, so the question, the request was to share my recollections of being a UTEP student. So, you know, the one thing I have to say about UTEP is I've always been really impressed by this organization. I'm totally impressed by CASS too, and MELM. I honestly do a lot of these things, and I'm not sure I've ever seen such a well-organized event, to be honest. Yeah, they're usually smaller, they're not as well organized, and I do a lot, right? Sometimes I think I must be the only STEM person with a disability because I get invited to do a lot of these, but my recollection of UTEP was, okay, so I was here a long time ago, and the campus has changed significantly. I'm amazed at how much you guys have built, but my years at UTEP were fond years. I made a lot of good friends, and you know, it was accessible back then, so I had no problem getting around the campus. I had no problem parking. I had, you know, I don't know if computer science is still in, it was in like an old building. Yeah.
We have a new building.
Oh yeah, you're not, because I've been in a new building. Yeah. It's beautiful. But we were kind of in an old building tucked away in I don't know what part of the campus.
Yeah, Prospect Hall.
Yeah, okay, long time ago. But you know, it was accessible. I felt like the classrooms were really pretty accessible because they were small and flat. And, you know, I had a really good experience at UTEP. The only reason why I left is because I was just tired of commuting. I'm not a good, well, mornings are so hard for me. So it's really hard to add an hour on top of that and then add an hour on top of that at night. And so, you know, that's why I didn't stay. But to be honest, the department head of computer science at New Mexico State was my lab mate here at UTEP. Yeah, Santron. And so, yeah, we laugh, you know. We're both getting old and gray, and we remember each other when we were young, spry doctoral students here at UTEP. But it was good days. It was a really good time. I met had very close colleague relationships. And but I never, you know, the faculty were great. It's a great department. I still think it is a really good department. I think you guys have a lot of good things going on down here at UTEP, which never ceases to amaze me how different things operate in New Mexico, but that's a whole other story.
Good. All right. Yeah.
As an engineer, did you ever feel motivated to design something that would help people with disabilities?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So the question was, as an engineer, did I ever feel motivated to design something for people with disabilities? And the answer is yes. So in my PhD, when I started my PhD, I was in artificial intelligence. I was in natural language processing. And so at University of Colorado, what I worked on was a predictive language system. It's so funny now because it's on your smartphone now, right? I worked on a predictive language system, a statistical predictive language system for Stephen Hawking. And the reason was because they came to us, now I'm having a senior moment. What's the name of the aerospace outfit that he works for? Okay, I can't remember. But they came to us and said, look, is there anything we can do to help speed his language, because the scientists get a little frustrated because he can't talk very fast. And so I built this huge statistical model, and it did predictive, you know, based on a scientific corpus. So the corpus was restricted, and predicted language. And so I wanted to continue my PhD in that, and so I actually wanted to go to the University of Delaware because they had something called the AI DuPont Institute, which I believe still exists, and its sole purpose is to develop assistive technology for people with disabilities. I actually accepted a position from them, and I got an NSF fellowship to do my PhD there. But while I was there were accessibility issues that they promised they could fix. But by the time I got home, there was a message in my box that said, we're really sorry, but we don't have the budget to fix any of this. And so I cried my heart out because I had already sent out all the no, I'm not coming to all the other institutions. And so I was crying, and I said, I don't know where I'm going to do my PhD. So my husband actually got on the phone and called the department head at NMSU and said, can she still come? And he said, sure, she can still come. We'll give her support. She can come. So, you know, that's part of my story. But yes, my first love was actually assistive technology.
Anybody else? No? It's a great question. Thank you.
Once again, I would like to thank Dr. Cook for her wonderful insights that are really inspirational for our students and for this population and for UTEP. Thank you so much once again. I think we would like to take a 10 minutes break before we continue for our next speaker. In the meantime, if you have some time, you want to interact with Dr. Cook, I think she will be here for a little while or later too. Feel free to do so. And we will start with our next